Get ready for a series of paranormal horror stories that are really going to mess with your head. The kind that make you wonder if what people call coincidence isn't actually the other side trying to send a message. Like the story you're about to hear, where a 7-year-old boy comes face to face with a blood-soaked woman in the hallway during what was supposed to be a normal sleepover at his cousin's house. What seemed like a quick scare turned into a memory he never managed to shake. But before we jump into the story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any terrifying tales, and tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching from. That night, the TV was the only light on in the whole house. Its blue glow flickered across the living room like some kind of modern fireplace, and my cousin Mike and I were sprawled out on mattresses on the floor, half asleep. We just finished watching Dumb and Dumber and laughed so hard, it felt like our stomachs were going to burst. He lived in one of those classic American suburban houses. White picket fence, front yard, carpet everywhere. I was 7 at the time, and it was my first night staying over without my parents. My aunt and uncle had gone out for dinner and wouldn't be back until late, so it was just the two of us in that big quiet house. Mike passed out in seconds, like he always did. But I lay there, tossing and turning, trying to find a comfortable position. The house had this weird smell, a mix of mildew and old wood, and the air conditioner hummed like heavy breathing. Sometimes it would cut out, and the silence that followed was so thick I could almost hear my own thoughts. I tried to distract myself by replaying jokes from the movie, but even with the TV still murmuring in the background, something kept my mind from settling. Around the middle of the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I tried ignoring it for a few minutes, but no luck. I got up slowly, careful not to wake Mike, and made my way through the dark hallways. Only a dim light from the kitchen was on, left on for some reason I never understood. The hallway to the bathroom felt longer than before, and my steps were muffled by the carpet, like someone was walking right behind me. In the bathroom, I tried to be as quick as possible. I closed the door but didn't lock it. I don't know why. Maybe because I had this faint feeling of being watched. It was like something was lingering in the air, something I couldn't explain. A strange energy, almost like static electricity. I washed my face, reached for the towel, and for a second, I thought I heard a whisper, but I shook it off. I opened the door to head back, and that's when it happened. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was a woman. She wore a long white nightgown, the kind that's almost see-through. But what terrified me, what made me freeze on the spot, was her face. Her hair covered half of it, but I could see the blood trickling from a gash that ran from her scalp down to her chin. Her eyes, they were open, but they didn't look alive. They were dull, like they'd been painted over. And yet, I had this unshakable feeling that she was staring right at me. I couldn't move, I swear. My body locked up. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. She didn't say a word, just stood there, breathing slowly like she was waiting for something. A chill ran up my spine, and my legs started to tingle. Everything around me felt colder. It was like time had stopped. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at her. All I remember is that suddenly I could move again. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the bedroom. I dove onto my mattress and started shaking Mike, trying to wake him up. I was trembling so hard I could barely speak. "There's someone out there. There's a woman in the hallway," I whispered, my voice cracking. Mike rolled over, mumbled something, and pulled the blanket over his head. He didn't care. Said I was dreaming, that it was just my imagination. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd felt. That wasn't a dream. It wasn't made up. I stayed awake for the rest of the night. Didn't sleep for a single minute. Every sound in the house made me hold my breath. The air conditioner, the creaking floorboards, even the ticking of the kitchen clock. Everything felt ominous. And the image of that woman, the blood dripping down her face, was burned into my mind. When morning came, I got up slowly and went with Mike to the hallway. There was nothing, no blood, no marks on the floor, nothing out of place. It was like it had all been a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. What I'd felt in that moment, The presence, the fear, the cold in the air was too real to be just in my head. At the breakfast table, Aunt Sarah was making pancakes, and I hesitantly asked, "Aunt Sarah, has anything weird ever happened in this house?" She stopped stirring the batter and looked at me in a way that didn't match the sweet smell of maple syrup. Mike let out a little laugh, but she didn't. She just got serious. "Why are you asking that?" Before I could answer, Mike blurted out, "He said he saw a woman in the hallway." My aunt didn't answer right away. She just kept staring at me, her expression a mix of confusion and worry. Then she went back to stirring, but harder this time, like she was trying to push down a memory. And that's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. There was something there. Something no one wanted to talk about. Aunt Sarah didn't say another word. She finished making the pancakes in silence while I pretended to eat. Mike kept acting like it was all some big joke, but I could see him glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, like he was waiting for me to say more. But I couldn't. It was like speaking out loud would make it more real, like the woman was still nearby, just waiting for me to mention her again so she could appear. After breakfast, we went out back to play video games in Uncle Tom's trailer, parked behind the house. It was cramped, but it had AC and an old Super Nintendo. But my mind wasn't on the game. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. Every detail of that woman, the blood, the eyes, the silence in the hallway, it was stuck to me, like I'd carried a piece of her presence with me. It wasn't until late afternoon that the subject came up again, almost by accident. Mike was telling an old story about how his older sister, Emily, had tried using a Ouija board with some friends in the basement. He laughed, saying they freaked out and ran when a candle blew out on its own. But Aunt Sarah, who was walking by, overheard and stopped in her tracks. "I've told you kids to stop messing with that board," she said firmly. That's when things started. I froze. I looked at her and she noticed. She took a deep breath and sat down on the porch chair, staring out at the lawn like she was traveling back in time. After that night, Emily changed. She started waking up in the middle of the night saying she saw a woman standing at the foot of her bed. Same description you gave last night. White nightgown, blood on her face, empty eyes. She drew the woman in her school notebook, and she'd cry at night. We thought it was trauma or her imagination, but then things started breaking on their own around the house. Lights flickered. The dog would stop in the middle of the room and growl at nothing. Mike stopped smiling. Emily stayed with her grandma in another town for a while. The house got quieter, but every now and then someone here would say they heard something, saw a shadow, felt a strange presence, like the negative energy had soaked into the walls. That feeling I'd had in the hallway, the cold air, the paralysis, her breathing, it all made sense now. It was like that spirit was trapped there, waiting for someone sensitive enough to see it. "Why don't you guys just move?" I asked almost without thinking. Because not everyone believes, and because sometimes it feels like it's stopped, like it's over, but then someone sees her again, and it all starts up again. I went back to my parents' house the next day, but that experience never left my mind. For weeks, I avoided being alone in the dark. I was afraid to open the bathroom door at night, terrified I'd come face to face with that woman again. I started researching similar stories, legends, and accounts. I found out that sightings of women in white nightgowns with blood on their faces weren't uncommon, and often they were tied to violent deaths, people who never found peace. But what haunted me the most was her stare, those hollow eyes looking at me like she was asking for help, or maybe trying to take me with her. I didn't know. Years later, as a teenager, I ran into Emily at a family gathering. She seemed okay, but there was still this distant look in her eyes. When we were alone in the kitchen, I asked, "Do you remember the woman in white?" She stopped cutting the pie. She didn't answer right away. She just said, "She never left." I didn't ask anything else. That was enough. Now, as an adult, I understand that experience was more than just a scare. It was a kind of awakening, a mark that stayed with me. After that night, I never doubted the existence of the supernatural again, or the presence of spirits who for some reason are still among us. Even now, sometimes when the house is too quiet, when the air feels heavier than it should. I remember that hallway, the smell of the carpet, the feeling of being watched, and her eyes staring at me in the dark. And there's one question that's never left me. What if she's still following me? What a nightmare. What did you think of the story? From 0 to 10, what would you rate it? Drop your opinion in the comments. If just seeing that woman covered in blood was enough to make you suspicious of the dark hallways in your own house, wait until you hear about a home where the voices didn't need bodies to be heard. The next story shows what happened when a family moved into an old Victorian house in Wales and quickly realized they weren't alone. The first night I spent in that house, I knew something there didn't want us. It was a massive Victorian home, 3 stories tall, deep in the Welsh countryside. My parents bought it at a steep discount, which was already weird, but they said it was because of the unfinished renovations. The top 2 floors were basically skeletal, just exposed beams, unfinished walls, and loose wires. We stuck to the ground floor, which was sort of livable, despite the smell of old paint, dust, and rotting wood. I was about 13 at the time. I remember being excited about the move, at least at first. The house had that old movie vibe, spiral staircase, high ceilings, and huge windows that let in light filtered through heavy curtains. But that excitement vanished after the first night. In the dead of night, I heard a door slam, then another, and another. I thought it was just a draft, but every window was shut. I got up, stepped into the hallway, and saw the bathroom door swaying on its own. The doorknob turned slowly, like someone on the other side was deciding whether or not to come in. The next morning, I told my parents. My mom said it was the wind. My dad barely listened. They were too busy with the renovations. But the doors kept slamming, every night more and more, banging, creaking, closing by themselves. After a few weeks, I decided to switch rooms. I moved to the one in the back, darker but quieter, or so I thought. The first night in that room, I woke up to a strange noise. Heavy breathing, like panting, right next to my bed. Like a dog. We didn't have a dog. I froze. The sound moved from one side of the room to the other, like the thing was pacing in circles, claws scraping the floor. I barely breathed, praying for it to stop. When dawn broke, I ran to the living room and told my dad. He let out a nervous laugh and said, "Funny. The guy who lived here before had a German Shepherd, slept in that same room." After that, the noises only got worse. Every night I'd hear that breathing, those footsteps. Then I started noticing creaks in the ceiling, like someone was walking upstairs, even though the upper floors were empty. And there was the sound of paper, like someone was slowly crumpling sheets one by one, in the dark. One day, I snapped. I looked up at the ceiling and said out loud, "Can you keep that dog quiet? I'm trying to sleep." I don't know what gave me the nerve, but I was exhausted. And for some reason that night the dog went silent. But something else started. The next night I heard voices. Not a normal conversation. Dozens of voices, all whispering at once like a crowd murmuring. Some laughed. Others sounded like they were crying. None of them were familiar. It was like being in the middle of a ghostly party where no one could see me. I buried my head under the pillow until morning. At breakfast, I asked my dad if he'd heard anyone talking. He said no, just shrugged it off. "Must have been a dream, kid." But I knew it wasn't. The voices were real, and they came every time I tried to sleep in that room. I started sleeping terribly. I was exhausted all day. And the worst part? I began to feel something strange in the air. A dark energy that seemed to hang only in that room. Some days the lights would flicker non-stop. Others, the whole room would turn ice cold, even with the heater blasting. And I always felt like someone was watching me, but I never saw anything. Just that suffocating silence and a presence that felt closer every night. My mom started noticing things too. One day, she said my dad's tools were scattered across the kitchen, even though he swore he'd put them away. Another time, she found muddy footprints in the hallway, even though the front door had been locked. And every time we asked each other about it, no one knew a thing. It was like the house had a mind of its own. Still, we stayed. My parents refused to admit anything was wrong. But every day in that house drained me a little more. The voices in my room grew clearer. Sometimes I could make out words. Other times it felt like someone was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. And it was only when I left that house temporarily to stay with my grandma for a few months that I realized something bizarre. The voices stopped. The noises vanished. For the first time in forever, I slept in peace. The supernatural experience seemed to have stayed behind. Or so I thought. It had just been waiting for me to come back. When my dad passed away, I was forced to return. It had been over a year since I'd last set foot in that house. Since moving in with my grandma, everything had gotten better. I slept well, no more noises, no more heavy energy weighing me down. It was like the old house had taken something from me, and being away had given it back. But now, with my dad gone and my mom wanting to sell the place, I had to help clear it out. The second I stepped inside, I smelled it. The same old scent of damp wood, stale paint, and something else. Something stagnant, like the air itself was trapped in time. The house was empty, quieter than ever. But that silence was never just the absence of sound. It was thick, the kind that presses against your chest, like someone's face is inches from yours, but they're not making a sound. On the very first night back, the voices returned. I woke up in the middle of the night in the same back room where it had all started. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I clearly heard a woman whispering my name. It wasn't my mom. The voice came from the corner of the room where the streetlight didn't reach. I lay still, listening, and when I focused, I realized there were more voices, dozens of them, whispering to each other, just loud enough to hear. I sat up and turned on the light. No one was there, but the air was freezing, heavy, like something was clinging to the ceiling or the walls. And that feeling of being watched, it was unbearable. I knew I wasn't alone. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd felt anything strange. She hesitated. Then she told me, in the weeks before my dad died, he'd started complaining about the same things. He'd hear people talking inside the house, even when he was alone. He'd feel someone watching him in the shower. Sometimes he'd wake up and see shadows standing on the stairs. But he never wanted to admit it was real, said it was all in his head. But now, he wasn't there to doubt it anymore. In the days that followed, more things happened. The doors started slamming again, even when locked. The sound of the dog, that German shepherd, came back too. The breathing, the pacing around my bed, the faint scratches on the wood. I didn't dare look. I'd pull the covers over my head and wait for dawn. But there was no escaping it, because it wasn't just in my room. It was in the whole house. One afternoon, my mom went upstairs to grab some boxes. She came back pale, said she'd heard footsteps behind her the whole time. But when she turned, no one was there. That same day, she swore she saw a shadow coming down the stairs, even though we were the only ones in the house. The whole place felt alive and hostile. The dark energy grew stronger every day. I started having recurring nightmares, dreams of people trapped in the walls, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. Dreams of my dad, but he never spoke. He just pointed at the ceiling like there was something up there I needed to see. One night, I woke up to a sharp noise, like furniture being dragged across the floor upstairs. I forced myself to go up there, flashlight in hand. The second floor was still unfinished, but one room had a reinforced floor. That's where the sound had stopped. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, just a single chair in the middle of the room, and scattered across the floor like they'd been thrown by the wind, dozens of yellowed sheets of paper, all covered in scribbles, random words, phrases like, "It's not just one. They're buried here. The room whispers." In the corner, there was a dark stain on the floor, like something had been burned there a long time ago. I backed away. The air grew heavier. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. All I felt was a breath on my neck, a muffled whisper I couldn't make out, but it sent chills down my spine. I ran downstairs, told my mom it was time to go. That house didn't want us there anymore, and honestly, I don't think it ever had. Before I closed the door for the last time, I looked back. The hallway, dark as ever, seemed longer, like it was stretching, pulling us back in. And way in the back, in that same room, I saw the light turn on by itself. For a second, I was sure someone was there, watching me, waiting for me to step inside again. But I didn't. I shut the door, locked it, and left. To this day, whenever I pass by an old house, I feel that same pressure in my chest, that sense of being watched, like whatever was in there had marked me somehow. And every now and then, when the world gets too quiet, I still hear the voices. Creepy, right? After so many unexplained noises, whispers, and invisible presences, maybe the scariest thing is when whatever's there actually has a shape, like in the story you're about to hear now, where a hooded figure started appearing in the shadows of a remote backyard in the Caribbean. But the strangest part wasn't that he showed up, it was how he disappeared. It was on the third day after we moved in that I started to feel like something was off. It wasn't just the stifling Caribbean heat or the constant hum of cicadas. It was this creeping sense that something or someone was always watching me from the back of the house. We had just moved into this big old house that backed up against a dense forest. It was beautiful, with colonial architecture, huge windows, and a porch that led straight into the woods. The price had been a steal, and the realtor mentioned the previous owner had left in a hurry. We didn't ask too many questions. Now, I wish we had. In the first week while I was cleaning up the backyard, I saw something that made me freeze. Behind the moss-covered stone wall, something gray flashed, like the tail of a long cloak dragging along the ground. It was only for a second. I was sure someone had come in from the woods. I ran to the side gate and circled around, expecting to see a neighbor, or maybe a lost hiker. But there was no one. No sound, no footprints, nothing. Just that thick, heavy silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a shadow from the trees, my mind playing tricks. But over the next few days, I kept seeing the same figure, sometimes standing between the trees, other times moving slowly in the distance, always wearing that long gray cloak. I never saw a face, and no matter how fast I tried to get closer, it would just vanish, like it had dissolved into the branches. The second time, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I looked out the window and saw it crossing the yard in complete silence. I rushed to the door and threw it open, but the backyard was empty. No footsteps, no rustling, just that same strange energy in the air, like time itself had stuttered. One night, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up with this feeling of being watched, like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. I got up to check multiple times, but there was never anything there. Then one early morning, I looked out the guest room window and saw it, standing on the other side of the fence, tall, hooded, motionless. It sent a chill down my spine. When I blinked, it was gone. What really got to me was one evening when I decided to go after it. I was determined to figure out what it was. I grabbed a flashlight, shoved my phone in my pocket, and stepped into the woods. The sky was still light, but inside the forest it was already dark. I walked for about 20 minutes until I saw the figure again, right in front of me, about 30 feet away. It was moving slowly, the cloak dragging through dry leaves. But there wasn't a sound. No crunching leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing. I tried to chase after it, but when it passed under a thin, dry branch, it just disappeared, literally, like it had stepped through an invisible curtain. The branch didn't even move. I stood there, heart pounding, with a cold dread creeping up my back that didn't match the heat of the forest. After that, the nightmares started. Every night I dreamed of an old, crumbling shack in the middle of the yard. A place that screamed, not with a voice, but with walls that trembled and windows that slammed shut on their own. It was like the house itself was begging for help. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my pillow soaked, my chest tight. I started avoiding sleep. I felt drained, like something was sapping my energy every night. My wife started noticing something was wrong too. Our kids were more restless, complaining about noises in their rooms, saying they saw someone standing near their windows. One night, our youngest daughter woke up crying, saying the hooded man was in her room. That hit me like a punch to the gut. We had never talked about it in front of them. How could she know? I ended up talking to some neighbors. An older man who had lived there for decades gave me a strange look when I mentioned the hooded figure. He was quiet for a long time, then just said, "Some things are better left unnamed." That was enough to make me even more uneasy. I started asking around and heard similar stories. People who had seen things in the woods. One woman said her grandmother used to talk about the forest hiding paths that weren't meant for us. Others mentioned silent apparitions, presences that didn't like being disturbed. Old legends blending spirits, entities, and gateways between worlds. I thought about moving, but something kept me there. Part of me wanted to understand, to uncover what it was. The other part was just trying to hold on to my sanity. Over time, the figure appeared less and less, but the feeling that it was still there never went away. It was like it had left a mark, a negative energy clinging to the house. I'd catch myself staring into the woods, half expecting to see that gray hood among the branches, like it was watching me back. This experience changed me, not just because of the constant fear, but because of the doubt it left behind. Are we really alone in this world? Is there a thin line between life and death, and sometimes it just breaks? I don't know what that hooded figure was. I don't know if it was a spirit, a shadow, or something else, but I know it was there. I know it saw me, just like I saw it. My family still avoids talking about it. When it comes up, there's this weight in the air, like just remembering it could bring that presence back. And sometimes when night falls and the wind rustles through the trees, I swear I hear a distant sound, like dragging footsteps through the leaves. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know if it'll come back. But one thing I'm sure of, that forest holds secrets that maybe should never be uncovered, and I was foolish enough to try. Chilling, isn't it? Seeing something that looks like it stepped out of another dimension is already terrifying. But what about when what you hear sounds like it's coming straight from the past? The next story takes place inside an abandoned World War II hangar, where a simple inventory job turned into a desperate escape. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the stories. So hit that like button to let YouTube know you're into this kind of content and don't want to miss any more horror tales. The first time I heard that voice, I thought it was some kind of prank. It made no sense for someone to be shouting inside a locked hangar in an abandoned airfield in the middle of nowhere before the sun had even risen. I'd been working there for just over 2 months. It was an old military airfield from World War II, out in the Arizona desert, decommissioned decades ago, but still used by the government as a storage depot for old vehicles. Rusted helicopter frames, trucks, even decommissioned armored vehicles. My job was simple. Show up early, take inventory, update the reports, and make sure nothing had been tampered with. Basically, I was paid to stare at junk and fill out spreadsheets. But that morning, everything felt different the moment I parked my pickup near the main hangar. The place was quieter than usual, not the normal quiet of an abandoned building, but a thick, muffled silence. Like sound itself couldn't travel properly in there. Not even my footsteps echoed right. And that hangar was massive. Curved metal roof, cracked concrete floors, stained with old oil and rust. I walked in with my clipboard, ready to start checking the trucks. I moved between the vehicles covered in tarps, heading toward the back where the oldest equipment was stored. That's when I heard it. A shout. Loud. Male. It sounded like someone calling for help, but it was just one word. "Hey!" It echoed from the far end of the hangar, but there was no answer. No sound after. Just that heavy silence pressing back in. I froze right where I stood, halfway down the aisle between the covered vehicles. I looked around. I figured it might have been the night security guy, but he never shouted like that. And here's the thing. I had the only company vehicle. The front gate was still chained shut. I'd unlocked it myself. I turned slowly toward the entrance, feeling a chill run up my spine. The kind of feeling you get when you're being watched. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach, like my body knew something was wrong before my brain could catch up. That's when the real panic hit. because in that moment I realized there was no sound of wind, no birds, nothing outside, like the whole world was holding its breath. I got back in the truck, started the engine, and just sat there for a few minutes trying to think. But the only thing pounding in my head was that shout, loud, alone, in a place where there shouldn't have been anyone but me. When I finally went back to the office a couple of hours later, I went straight to the manager, an older guy named Don, a skeptic, the kind who'd laugh off any ghost story. I told him what happened, expecting him to laugh and say I was losing it. But he didn't. He didn't laugh, didn't mock me. He just looked at me for a few seconds in silence, pulled up a chair, and told me to sit down. Said I might as well know the truth about that place. According to him, during the war, that hangar housed a small crew of mechanics who worked on fighter planes. They were under constant pressure, fixing up aircraft in record time to send them back to the battlefield. One day, two of those mechanics, one named Marty, the other Carl, were working inside a fighter suspended by a crane. Something went wrong. A cable snapped. The plane dropped 5 meters and crushed them both. One died instantly. The other lingered for a few minutes, trying to scream for help. But the roar of the engine drowned him out. They say the soldiers there at the time heard a shout, but they couldn't tell where it came from. By the time they shut everything down, it was too late. The hangar was closed for a few days. Then it reopened. But no one liked going in there alone. Over time, stories started spreading. Footsteps, voices, tools falling for no reason, and especially that shout, always out of nowhere, always in the silence. Years passed. The airfield was decommissioned and the story faded. But those who still worked there, like Don himself, knew that hangar wasn't like the others. He admitted he never went in there alone, and if he had to check inventory, he'd leave the door open and the truck running, just in case. The next morning I tried to act like nothing had happened, but the tension was obvious. I went back into the hangar, but this time, I left the truck running and the hangar door wide open. I worked as fast as I could, logging vehicle numbers, snapping photos, filling out the clipboard with shaky hands. The feeling of being watched never left me. It was like someone was standing up on the platform, just watching me in silence. At one point, I almost dropped everything and ran. One of the tarps slipped off a truck, hitting the ground with a sharp snap that echoed inside. I jumped so hard I dropped my phone. And even after I saw no one was there, I still had that strange feeling, like something had just passed by. When I finally finished, I ran back to the truck and got out of there without looking back. I was sweating, my heart was pounding, and all I wanted was to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. The worst part? Over the next few days, I tried to come up with a rational explanation. Wind carrying sound from outside, the structure creaking, some acoustic trick. But nothing fit. That wasn't just a weird noise. It was a presence, a negative energy, a kind of dread that clung to you, like a smell you couldn't wash off. To this day, I remember that shout. Clear, desperate, like someone was trapped there, stuck in an endless loop, reliving the last seconds of their life. And every time I close my eyes to try and forget, it's like I see a figure up on the platform, wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit, eyes full of pain. I don't know if it was a ghost, I don't know if it was my mind playing tricks, but since that day I've never been the same. And now, every time I pass by any hangar, I hold my breath, waiting for the shout. So creepy. What did you think of this one? From 0 to 10, what would you rate it? Tell me in the comments. On the third night, the noise came from the ceiling. It wasn't subtle. It sounded like someone had tripped up there, slamming their knee hard against the wooden floor, followed by a slow, heavy dragging, like something was being pulled against its will. I jolted awake at the sharp, precise sound, sitting up in bed with my heart racing. All I could hear was the low meow of our cat, Jasper, standing frozen in my bedroom doorway, staring down the dark hallway, his tail puffed up like a bottle brush. We had just moved into that house in a small village in northern Italy, not far from Verona. It was a quiet area with open fields, distant hills, and a cold, damp climate that kept everything shrouded in mist. The house itself was old but well kept, with tall windows, high ceilings, and a creaky wooden staircase that groaned with every step. My mom had landed a job at a local school, and the plan was to start fresh, far away from the mess we'd left behind in Brazil. The first day, everything seemed normal. The movers arrived early, we unpacked boxes, laughed as Jasper hid inside the cabinets, and went to bed exhausted but excited. The second night was when Jasper started acting strange. He crawled under the bed and refused to come out, even for food. Every little noise made his fur stand on end, and he'd hiss, something he'd never done before. My mom figured it was just stress from the move. I thought so too, until that third night. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and made my way to the door. Jasper was still there, eyes wide, pressed against the ground. When I looked down the hallway, I saw nothing. Just the dim glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the windows. I moved slowly toward the stairs. The noise had stopped, but I still felt that weird sensation, like something was watching me from above. A kind of spiritual presence. Hard to explain, but it sent chills down my spine. I climbed the stairs, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the top, I went to the guest room, where I thought the noise had come from. Nothing was out of place, the bed was made, the window shut. Just the strong smell of old wood mixed with dampness. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the corner of the wall because for a moment I swore someone was there. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. A heavy negative energy, like the air had thickened. The next night it happened again, only this time I saw it. The figure was in the living room, near the bookshelf, tall, thin, and gray like it had been sketched in charcoal. It had no face, just an empty void where its eyes should have been. When I stepped closer, it turned toward me, as if it knew I was there, and in the blink of an eye, it vanished. I didn't even scream. I just froze. I stood there, not knowing what to think. My body was shaking, but my mind was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe I was just exhausted. But that feeling of being watched clung to me. I ran to my mom's room. I woke her up and told her everything. She looked at me for a few seconds, silent, then slowly got up. She went to the kitchen, grabbed some candles, jars of coarse salt, and a few leaves she always brought back from her travels. She said they were rue and rosemary to cleanse the space. I'd never taken that stuff seriously, but that night, just seeing her act like she knew what she was doing calmed me down. She lit the candles around the house, sprinkled salt in the corners, and murmured words in Italian that her grandmother had taught her. Meanwhile, Jasper followed us closely, his eyes fixed on the dark hallways. At one point, he stopped, looked up, and let out a long, low meow, his claws scraping the floor. The candlelight flickered wildly, as if someone had just rushed past us. My mom stopped praying and looked at me, her face pale. The next day, she talked to the neighbors. The woman next door, a kind lady named Francesca, knew everyone's story. When my mom described what had happened, Francesca's eyes dropped. She hesitated, then told us her son, Lorenzo, had hanged himself in that house. He was only 14. The police never figured out why. No note, nothing. They just found his body in the guest room, the same room where I'd felt that strange energy. My mom came home more serious than I'd ever seen her. She said it wasn't just Lorenzo. According to Francesca, even before her family moved in, the previous owner was a lonely man who died in his sleep in the living room, a smile on his face. He loved the house so much, he used to say he'd never leave, even in death. Francesca told this like it was just a quirky story about an old friend, but my mom saw it differently. It explained a lot. She told me there were probably two spirits in the house. One, the old man's, was stuck there out of attachment. He didn't want to leave, but he didn't mean any harm. He just stayed, like he still lived there. The other, the boys, seemed to be searching for someone. Maybe Lorenzo himself, maybe something else. But he was confused. It was like he was trapped in the moment of his death, not fully understanding what had happened. That night, my mom performed another ritual, this time more intense. She lit strong incense, recited longer prayers, At one point, she stopped and asked me to speak too. She said the boy needed to hear a young voice. Nervous, all I could manage was, "It's okay, you can rest. What happened wasn't your fault. We want you to be at peace." The air felt lighter after that. No more noises, no more strange figures, no more Jasper hiding in the corners. It was like the house had sighed in relief. But it wasn't like everything went back to normal, not completely. We stayed there for a few more months. Then my mom decided it was time to leave. She said she didn't want to live with that lingering uncertainty, even if everything had stopped. The house had scars, and even if we couldn't see the spirits anymore, we could still feel the weight of what had happened there. After all of that, it became impossible to say ghosts don't exist. It wasn't an illusion, a dream, or imagination. It was real. We saw it. We felt it. We lived it. And if there's one thing I learned, it's that there are energies we don't understand. Presences trapped for reasons beyond logic. Not all of them are bad, but none of them are there by accident. Now, every time I hear a strange noise in the house, or see Jasper staring at an empty corner, I pause. I wait. And I listen closely, because some silences say more than any scream ever could. If you're still here, it's because one of these stories got to you too. Maybe it even reminded you of something you've never been able to explain. If that's the case, write "haunted house" in the comments, just so I know you stayed with me till the end. While you're at it, subscribe so you don't miss any more stories like these. There's always something new here to send chills down your spine, or make you think twice before turning off the lights. And drop a like if any of these stories caught you off guard. That's what keeps this strange, supernatural conversation between us going. There's another video right here that keeps the same vibe. Click it and come with me for one more story. Just watch out for the noises in the hallway, okay?